All right, guys, welcome back to the show. So today we are going to be talking all about commercial real estate brokerage. I know a big question a lot of agents have, especially those who are a little bit newer, or even those who's been in the business on the residential side for a long time, is just how do I get into commercial real estate brokerage? Right? It's been kind of a question that a lot of agents have been asking, and we're going to help you answer that question and some of the residual questions that come with that as well today. And who better to do that than my guest, Raphael Collazo, and he is the guest, or he is the host of the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. So he knows a little, maybe one or two things about commercial real estate, probably a little bit more than that. And he's also the author of the Millennial Playbook. So he's definitely got quite a bit of a resume here. But without further ado, I want to bring him on and just welcome you to the show, Raphael.
No, it's an honor to be here, man. Thanks again. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So appreciate you being here. And just for like starters, for people who may not be listening to your podcast, who haven't checked out your YouTube channel yet, would you mind kind of breaking down your story and how you got into, the commercial real estate business and kind of where you're at now and some of the things you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So as far as what got me into the commercial real estate business, I actually studied engineering in college, and I was a software developer and consultant at a big company that implemented software systems for government agencies. And I was kind of a mover around the country. I lived in DC, I lived in Puerto Rico, and then ultimately I moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm at currently, for a big tax software project after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. And that project got put temporarily on hold back in, I would say, 2018, 2019. I was looking to kind of transition away from what I was doing already. It was an engaging profession, obviously lucrative and everything else, but it was very transitory. I was moving a lot, and the whole process of development and everything was fun, but I didn't see myself doing it for 20, 30 years. And so I started doing a little bit of research. My mom was a residential agent in Arizona she started, I think, in 2009 or 2010. So she's been around for a little while. And she encouraged me to kind of look into getting my real estate license to get into residential real estate. But when I started doing a little bit of research about, the profession as far as the residential side was concerned, and I talked to my mom about her experiences, I realized it probably wasn't a choice that I wanted to take as far as my personality was concerned. And so I started doing a little bit more research on the commercial side, and that appealed to me a lot more. I had a small catering company in college. I've always been kind of somewhat business savvy. And so I figured, okay, well, I get to work with business owners and investors on the commercial side. And so why not take the leap and try to get into the commercial brokerage space? And so what enabled me to do that was I transitioned by, doing a house hack. So I bought a fourplex and, lived in one of the units and rented out the other three and lowered my expenses significantly. And then, made the switch from development, software development to commercial real estate. And I know we can kind of dive into, right, the steps I took to try to get an opportunity in the space.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, probably first off, like right off the bat, I think a lot of people who are maybe just getting their license, who maybe got their real estate license, who don't have like too much experience, maybe they've just joined a brokerage or they're still looking, and they're the same as you, right? They want to get into commercial real estate. They know residential is not really their thing, and they want to work with more business owners. They want to work, more on the business side of, real estate. What are some things that they could be doing right now to, get into, like you said, the commercial real estate opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm of the mindset that, it's probably, if you're going to go commercial, I'm big into trying to just do it full time. I know there's people who do resi-mercial, which is, mostly residential, and then have commercial deals come in. The only problem with that, in my opinion, is that the support isn't necessarily there. So I've imagined a lot of these residential brokerages, your broker may or may not do a whole lot of commercial. And so in that case, either A, they don't feel like they want to take that responsibility on, so they'll tell you to refer that opportunity out. Or number two, if they allow you to do it, you may not have the level of support you need in order to make sure that you're representing your client to the best of your ability. And so, although it can be tough, I know it's not easy. I mean, my first year, I made almost nothing. It's one of those things where, jumping into the commercial real estate space and just focusing on commercial real estate in the long run will be the most beneficial if you want to stick to the commercial space. But having said that, I've seen other agents that have done the residential side, and they've kind of slowly picked up commercial deals here and there. And that's also an opportunity. But I'll speak to the strictly jumping into commercial real estate brokerage, because that's the only experience I really have. As far as the brokerage side is concerned, it's a lot different than residential in that when you look to join a residential brokerage, people are pretty much recruiting you. So you go to EXP, you go to Keller Williams, you go to these other larger brokerages, and they're offering, their services and saying, hey, this is the reason why you should join our brokerage. Whereas with the commercial real estate space, it's a little bit more opaque, and it's really hard to really build those relationships to get you into the space. It's almost kind of like finance and banking, et cetera. And so, one of the things that I would recommend people do is, identify those players within your market that are, operating at a high level on the commercial side. And then just make it a mission to try to do something to add value, or maybe even connect for coffee, and just kind of start building those relationships early on. So I'd say that's the first thing. And then also, if you are in the residential space already, talk to other residential agents. Maybe they've done deals with, commercial agents in the past, and they can at least make the connection point for you. And so I'd say that's a good starting point when it comes to trying to at least have a conversation with a commercial agent to see if it's something you would actually like to do.
Right. Yeah. So I think the big thing I got out of that was, for somebody who's just starting out, right? So on the residential side, we all know, it's very easy to join a brokerage, right? They want you to join them. It's not so the other way around. But for commercial, it's a little bit harder, right? You have to kind of find these certain opportunities, maybe a specific team within a brokerage, or maybe like something a little bit more local that only deals in commercial real estate deals. So kind of on that end, it's a little bit more, I wouldn't say like harder, but probably it takes a little bit more effort on the agent to actually join a brokerage and get into the commercial space full time.
Absolutely. And there's a lot less commercial agents too. I mean,
Right.
I think they did an analysis here locally. It's like, I think we have almost over 1,000 residential agents in Louisville. And then as far as commercial agents that are actually transacting, it may be 1/20th of that,
Right.
So it's like, you've got a discrepancy in the total number. And then, typically it takes you a few years to get going in commercial real estate. You usually, and not to say you can't do it, but the first year is usually pretty rough. The second year as well. So really, you don't start hitting your stride until year three or four. And so from a broker's perspective, it's like, okay, we really have to believe and want to invest in this individual to make sure that they survive those first few years, because it is it's a tough business. It's not easy. There's just not as many deals out there to work on.
Right. Right. Yeah. There's not as many deals. And I believe like commercial deals, they take a lot longer to actually close, especially
Yeah.
compared to residential deals, where I think a lot of agents kind of used to, bit shorter closing time.
Mhm.
So, I mean, kind of speaking on that. So, what is something that like maybe somebody who's a little bit newer to the industry, or maybe they've done residential for a couple of years, they don't necessarily have, experience in commercial, but they want to get into it, right? So how can they kind of pack their resume, if you will, to, appeal to a broker so that they can actually get into the game and get that opportunity? Is there anything they can be doing, maybe
Sure.
looking into investing, certain courses that they could be taking to, maybe CE courses, different things like that?
Yeah, sure. So as far as the commercial real estate business, it's all relationship, right?
Mhm.
So you really need to start building relationships with people in the space. And so that's why, if you're already at a residential brokerage, talking to your network and saying, "Hey, look, I want to get into commercial real estate. Who do you know that's in the business?" And so, there's different opportunities in the commercial real estate space. You could work for a developer to find opportunities, and you could work for the development firm. You could be a real estate manager at a large corporate, entity that's looking for sites for a quick service restaurant. You could be a commercial broker at one of these large commercial brokerages like CBRE, Cushman, JLL, et cetera. Or you could be at a more of a boutique firm, which is what I'm at. I'm at a relatively small boutique firm that we do a decent amount of production, but again, it's a boutique firm. So there's pros and cons to each. I know we talked about a video that I had done, kind of explain the pros and cons of each. And so, I think the first step is really just tapping into your sphere and saying, "Hey, this is what I want to do. Who do you know that's in the space?" And then try to sit down and have coffee with them. And when I say sit down and have coffee, don't just sit down and have coffee and then say, "Oh, don't have anything prepared." Just kind of be aimless, because that doesn't show initiative. I think in any situation when you're trying to get an opportunity, you have to show initiative. So do your research, try to do what you can as far as understanding the dynamics of the local market and seeing ways you could add value to that organization. And then when you have the conversation with that individual, at the end, make your interest known, and also understand what their needs are. So do research on them, et cetera. So just come prepared, and have the more conversations you have, the more opportunities come available.
Right, absolutely. So that should be pretty common for anybody looking in the real estate industry, right? So if somebody's doing residential real estate, they need to be pretty relationship based in their market, anyways. So
Mm-hmm.
now it's just kind of shifting that intention of when you're doing with building relationships is getting more into knowing other commercial agents, maybe potential commercial investors and other developers as well, so they can get a new set of opportunities than you were looking for before. So, yeah.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And then as far you mentioned curriculum, I mean, there are definitely various CEs you can take to kind of learn a little bit about the investing space. CCIM is an institute that focuses on, it's called the Certified Commercial Investment Member. It focuses on deal analysis for commercial real estate and market analysis. So it'll tell you how to, do site selection for quick service restaurants, convenience store clients, really get an understanding of these corporate decision-making processes. Because, if you start working with these large franchises or corporate businesses,
Yep.
you have to understand how they make decisions. And it's not just, oh, that land looks good. It's why is that land good? What are the demographics? Are there traffic counts? What's the drive time, 5, 10 minute, 10-minute drive time to the location? How does that impact the demand and projected sales for the area? Right. So those are the types of, metrics you have to understand if you're going to start working with some of these clients.
Right, absolutely. And that's one of the big things I think a lot of people talking on commercial real estate mentions, is that the decisions being made and some of the things that your clients will be looking for are a lot different than on the residential side, right? So if you're, just a residential real estate agent, you go out there, they look for certain, bedrooms, bathrooms, location, neighborhood, schools, right? It's pretty cookie cutter. So on the commercial side, it's a lot more about numbers, and it's more of a business decision. Well, it's actually 100% a business decision rather than more of an emotional buy. So I don't know if you can kind of touch on that, maybe some of the differences, and what are maybe some commonalities between the two, if there are any, and that residential agents can maybe carry some of their skill sets even over to the commercial side.
For sure. And that's not to say that emotion isn't involved in the commercial decision. I mean, we can't make decisions without some sort of emotion involved. So,
right.
I think that's somewhat of a misnomer, but I agree. I think the feeling, the tie to a property is going to be a lot different than in a commercial setting for the most part. And there's certain situations too where we similar to residential real estate, you may have a building owner who, their father or their mother owned a business, they passed away, and now they're trying to sell the real estate. There may be an emotional connection to that property that they've yet to let go of, and therefore it's going to inhibit their ability to sell the building right away. And that's something that happens, on a relatively regular basis. But if you're talking about, investors, I mean, again, it's a lot of numbers and trying to get people comfortable with making a decision to purchase, right? There's certain investors out there that are very aggressive, and, they may or may not need, 50% return or, some absurd returns in order to make them comfortable to make that decision, because they're able to, execute their business plan in a way such that their investors are happy. But then there's other investors out there that are looking for much more distressed properties. Therefore, they're willing to put in the legwork and they're expecting a higher return. So understanding what your investor is looking for is the first step in understanding, what you're going to be going out there and trying to find. From the business owner perspective, it really just depends on what type of business you focus on. Like if you're focusing in the industrial space, logistics, real estate is very attractive right now. So high ceilings, drive-in doors, docks, et cetera, to be able to make sure that product can be moved into the warehouse and moved out quickly. And then obviously being close to their main suppliers is also important, because, the cost of transportation is number one expenses for business owners. So if they can close the gap between where the suppliers are located and themselves, it helps with, making sure that their business operates most effectively. And on the retail side, which is what I do a lot of, I work a lot with franchise owners. They have, their specific criteria on a national level to try to isolate different targeted intersections or areas of town based on demographics, traffic counts, proximity to certain, retail centers, et cetera, and what they can pay as a function of the sales that can be achieved on site. And so they usually perform some form of analysis to say, okay, we have these many households in the area. This is their income. This is how much on a yearly basis they spend on XYZ. If we take a 10% market share of that, what's the total expected revenue we can make? Based on that total expected revenue, what type of rent can we pay in this area? Right. And it's very numeric as far as what they can do. And so they're not necessarily afraid to spend a fortune in rent if, in fact, they can generate a considerate amount of sales on that particular site. And so that's just very high level. Obviously, it's really dependent on the person. And that's why, over time you get better at it. But, I wasn't very good at it when I first started, like getting an understanding of exactly what they need and why they need it, and then questioning some assumptions as well, because just because you know this with residential, it's like, just because someone says they want something doesn't mean they actually want it. And once you start
Absolutely.
going down the road, you're like, wait a second, you told me you wanted this, but now you're really wanting this. Like, so getting an understanding on the front end is a skill that you just have to develop over time. But yeah, that's just very high level. And I don't know if that answered your question, but I try to keep it as high level as possible.
Yeah, it did actually. So I think the people might be looking for different things, right? On the commercial
Mhm.
side and the residential side. But like you said, the similarity between that, and I think it goes with any business or any sales for that matter, is just getting to the bottom of what this person, what this client actually wants, right? And sometimes, like you said, they might say one thing, but they really want another thing. You just have to develop that communication skill set to get that, get to a mutual agreement where you both can, work together, right? Because that's really, I think even more so on the commercial side, it's really more of a joint partnership than it is than like just you brokering a deal. Because I think a lot of residential agents, they may be really good at generating leads, and they're just really good at brokering deals, right? But for commercial, I think it's much more of a long-term partnership
Mhm.
relationship because your client's a business owner and they want somebody who is just as, if not more so, business savvy than they are, or at least in their specific field or specific expertise.
Yeah, and another thing too is, that's a good point. And unless you're working in the investor space in residential, a lot of the transactions that you do are a lot more transactional, quote unquote, because you may have
Right.
someone who sells their house and decides to move somewhere else, or maybe they're buying their house locally, and you may maintain contact over time, but realistically, that people move every, what is it, 5 to 7 years, I believe, is the
Yeah.
average. Whereas a
Yeah. The
lot of my
transaction cycle is about 8 years.
8 years, is it? Okay. So yeah. So once every 8 years, you may have a transaction. In the case, in my case, on the retail side, I worked with clients since the beginning of my career, and obviously on the investment front, it's very repetitive. On the
Mhm.
franchise front, they buy rights to certain targeted intersections or areas of town. So they may open 3 or 4 locations in a 2 or 3 year period. So, I'm their trusted advisor from the beginning. And if they decide to expand down the road, I'm their guy at this point, because I've been able
Right.
to kind of make myself invaluable. And so I would say on the commercial side as well, not always, right? If you're just doing a one-time transaction with someone who wants to dispose of their building that they've owned for a long period of time, it may be somewhat more transactional. But if you're working with someone on a consistent basis, I feel like that's a lot more common on the commercial
Right.
front, especially if you're on the investing side, development side, franchising, retail, et cetera.
Right, absolutely. Like, for real estate agent on the residential side, they kind of just they do the transaction and then the most they'll probably, keep in contact with them is for like a potential referral down the line,
Mhm.
right? Instead of actually, working with them to buy, more properties or provide them more service. But on the commercial side, like you said, and I think that's probably the reason why commercial is so relationship based, because once you get a good relationship with one client, they're going to be looking for more than one service, right? Like you said, if you get in with a franchise, right, they're going to be looking to expand their business down the line. And if you have a good relationship with them, you help them once, they're probably going to go back to you because high level business, they want to work with people they already worked with. They know they can depend on, they know they can trust, they know they can expect the same things every time or at least similar service every time. So it's very important that, it might take a little bit longer to get into some of these relationships. Once you do, it has a much higher payoff. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, and yeah, you're right, and I think that you being that node, that go to person, and the same in residential, you're the quarterback, right? You put people
Right.
in touch with the appropriate parties that you need to get the transaction done smoothly and efficiently, and you want to be the person that your client, when their foot hurts, they call you and say, hey, do you have a podiatrist that you recommend, right? If you can get to that level, I mean, that's really the level of trusted advisor that you hope to become. You don't always get to that point, but I have clients all the time that call me and say, hey, do you have contact for this? Hey, do you have a contact for this? Because they know I have a pretty broad network in town, and as a result, I can be that person, and every time they think of something they need, I'm the person they call. So
Right. Absolutely. And I think one thing you kind of brought up as well, in that, your expertise is in mostly in retail, that commercial real estate is all about kind of all these different types of areas of expertise, right? So in residential, right, we know agents out there who sell, to first-time home buyers, and then next day to go and sell a new construction, and the next day to work with an investor, and the next day they sell a $2 million luxury property, right? They do it all, and they can do it all, right? It's within their realm of possibility. I don't believe that's the case in commercial real estate. I think you kind of have to stick to at least one or two different, specific pieces of expertise, types of properties. So if you can kind of touch on that a little bit, maybe why that is, and like how you can actually decide which specific niche you can go into, and how you may be, setting up referral partnerships with the people around you as well for other clients.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's a great point. And I would say, it's interesting though, in the sense that, at the bigger brokerages, a lot of times if you join them, you'll be assigned a team or you'll be
Okay.
put on a team. So the decision's kind of already made for you. You'll either join the office team, you'll join the retail team, you'll join the industrial team, you'll join whatever specific team has a need at that moment in time. And so the decision's somewhat already made. In my case, I joined a boutique brokerage, and really they don't care what I do, as long as, I can eat what I kill, essentially. So I started working on pretty much all types of transactions. I've done office deals, I've done retail deals, I've done industrial deals, I've done, hospitality, I've done all these different types of, property types. But, I think over time you just find what you like, and for me, it took me a little while. At first, I was focusing more on the multifamily side. I own some multifamily property, and so I understand it very well. I realized after transacting a while in that space, I was like, well, I don't necessarily like it as much as retail and industrial and et cetera. So I've started shifting my focus more to try to get more business in the retail space. And I've really enjoyed that decision thus far. But as far as, your decision-making process for it, it's really, you don't know until you know, right? So if you're in the boutique brokerage, I mean, try to work on different deals, see what sticks. Or maybe you like the more corporate, office environment, right? So you may like to show lawyer offices, you may like to show, corporate headquarters for these large skyscrapers, et cetera. That may be more your personality. Maybe you like the work when it comes to multifamily investment. I know that's a hot topic right now, so there's a lot of people looking for those types of opportunities, and maybe that's something that you really enjoy doing and talking to investors about on a day-to-day, and site touring and going into apartments and kind of identifying potential issues that could affect the bottom line of the investment. On the retail front, you may really like working with different types of business owners. That's why I like retail, is because I can work with all different types of businesses. I've had franchise clients on the quick service restaurant side. I've had convenience stores. I've worked with grocery stores. I've worked with different type of retail businesses, like sales of goods and services. Right. So really all different types, and you have to understand the nuances of each of the businesses so that you could best serve them in what they need. And so that's one of the reasons why I liked retail so much. And on the industrial front, it's also kind of nuanced as well, because you got the logistics side of things, which are larger warehouses, more expansive. It's a distribution facility, so you have to get trucks in and out very quickly. Whereas manufacturing is a little bit different. There's more refined equipment. The electrical panels have to be able to support the high voltage equipment that you're going to be using on site. There may be more land that they need to store materials on. And if you like getting out there and interacting with that target client, that may be the focus area you decide to focus on, but you won't really know until you kind of get into it. And if you do join a big brokerage, I mean, like I said, the decision's made for you and you just kind of run with it. So.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's pretty important to kind of know as well. So for a residential agent, right, they can kind of go out and just do everything all at once. But in commercial, it's more so like finding out what you enjoy the most. Because like you said, like two different types of deals, they're what's involved in them are very different, right? And they're not so residential. A lot of the transaction is cookie cutter. The forms are all promulgated. They're all kind of they're the same forms. That's pretty much not the case commercial. I believe that lawyers usually get involved on both sides of the transaction as well, because mostly buyer beware. And in residential, there's a lot of kind of laws protecting the agent and the consumers as well. So maybe kind of touch on that a little bit. What are some things maybe to look out for on the commercial side? Is it potentially, I've heard, for a lot of investors that could even be a benefit. And, because I think a lot of residential agents are intimidated by that, right? They kind of know what their rights and their protections are, and they don't want to kind of jump into the commercial side and just be kind of thrown in there. Maybe they get like a $20 million lawsuit the next day because they did, a form wrong or something.
Sure. Yeah, no, and that's a good point. And that's one of the reasons why I think joining a commercial brokerage is important. So you have that support on the back end from your broker that has done this a lot and they understand the nuances of the profession. But as far as the differences, you're right. I mean, it's very common for me if I list like a multifamily property. I listed like a eightplex last year, and I had residential agents asking me about, seller's disclosures and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, there's no seller's disclosure. It's essentially, buyer beware, like you said. And, you can do your inspection, you can do everything else, but, it's an as-is transaction. And so that was, obviously kind of threw some agents off about the fact that wasn't the case. Same with retail, industrial, all that sort of thing. There's no like basic form of how you approach the transaction. It is somewhat like the Wild Wild West. And you'll see it all the time where people have their own commercial contracts. Like we have our own contract that we hire an attorney to draft for us. And doesn't look anything like a regular residential contract. It's a separate form that has, a separate document that has like 30 provisions in it that explains like all rights and everything else pertaining to the transaction. And that's specific to our brokerage. Now, another brokerage may have a completely different purchase agreement, and that's fine. That's just how it is. On the leasing side, I mean, that's where, the lawyers often get involved because, the way that words are phrased and the way the provisions are phrased could affect a tenant long term. And if you're going to be occupying a space for years and years on end, the average lease deal's anywhere from like 3 years all the way up to 20 years, right? So, you're going to live with that document for many years, and that's probably behooves you as a tenant or even as a landlord as well to involve lawyers to make sure that everyone's in agreement on as far as what the expectations are for that lease agreement. So, that's definitely one of the differences on that front. And as you alluded to earlier, I mean, the transaction length is a lot longer. So, you get excited because you start working with a tenant, or you get excited because you start working with someone and you're like, okay, like we got this property listed now and it's going to be put out on the market and we're going to get a ton of interest. And it's like, you may get some interest, but even then, the timeline's going to be quite some time. I mean, I'm working with a buyer right now that we just got under contract. I've been working with them for over a year. I've had several lease deals that I've worked on that have dragged on and on and on. And we're in month 6 of negotiations on this lease deal for a shopping center because the lawyers can't come to an agreement on exactly how the phrasing needs to be. Land deals take a lot longer to actually get done because developers need time to go through all the different land entitlements, any restrictions that are on site. If they need to rezone the property, that takes a long time depending on what municipality you're in. If there's sewers that need to be run to the site, that's another, long period of time to try to get that done on the city level. So permitting when it comes to build outs, I mean, it does drag on and on and on. And so, a lot of times you'll see people where, they get excited because like, oh yeah, I'm starting to work with this person. And then they're 3, 4, 5 months in and you're like, oh my gosh, like we're not even close to the finish line, but that's just part of it. And that's why, developing that expectation early on is definitely beneficial.
Right, absolutely. I think for a lot of residential agents, like stuff that can get carried on for like over a week, they get pretty frustrated. So commercials, it's a lot longer than a week for some of these deals.
It's like herding cats sometimes, I feel like. We always talk about it. We always talk about it in the office. We're just like, oh my gosh, it's been 2 weeks and we haven't heard anything. And I'm continually following up, and it's just like, well, what can you do?
Right. Yeah. And it's one of those things, right? Because they're big decisions, right? They involve a lot more capital and a lot more risk than, what most agents are kind of used to. So it's a different level of business, I will say. I think it's just understanding and also business savviness as well. So, and one of the other things I think I've heard a lot of about commercial real estate from different brokers is the ancillary services. I've always heard the commercial real estate is more full service than residential. It kind of the stuff you kind of go in the residential realm. You're not supposed to mess with any of the mortgages. You refer a lender. You got the title company referrals. You refer the inspector, but it's not necessarily full service, right? Again, we were talking about it before. It's more just a transactional piece, but I think maybe you can kind of touch on that if that's true and kind of what the extent of that is, being full service in commercial.
Yeah. So it's from a full service perspective. I think what you're referring to is, brokerages having not just a brokerage. You could have a property management arm, that does a lot of leasing for landlords, and that's very common. So you may have a brokerage arm of your company that focuses on the sale, purchase and lease of existing structures in your community or your town, or you maybe the state or other states. And then you have a property management arm where you represent landlords to help lease up commercial property. And not only that, there also could potentially be an arm where it's a development arm,
Right.
and you're producing products. So you're taking either raw land or existing structures and doing an adaptive reuse project, redeveloping it, and then either A, selling it, or B, putting it into your portfolio and then operating on the property management front. And then there's also companies that not only have the development front, but they also have a construction front for third-party services. So they'll, represent tenants and say, okay, we'll build out your restaurant space for XYZ, and they'll use that as money to generate within their business so that they can then apply it to their brokerage business or the property management business or the development business. And so, that's kind of the model some brokerages decide to follow. Not all do, but it is something that that is definitely common.
Right. Do you think that it gives, maybe that potential brokerage a almost like a competitive advantage, but that's maybe like that's their unique selling proposition to maybe a client? And for the agent, is that something to consider? Maybe if like you're working with, a client and you can kind of offer this on the back end and say, you can work with me here, but we also have all these services kind of in-house for you to benefit from.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, I think anytime you can, especially if you build trust with the client, if you build trust with the client and say, look, like, we also have an arm that does X, Y, Z. If they already trust you, they'll probably be more likely to trust you on that front as well. And, obviously you could probably work with them a lot more efficiently since you already know a lot about them, what they need and everything else. So the timelines are definitely shortened. And then maybe cost even because you're able to cut them a deal, especially because if you're going to be retaining their business on the property management front, maybe there's a way for you to win business on that front as well. And then on the development side, I know that's one of the things that a lot of people want to get into as a result. I mean, I think for a lot of people, brokerage is a means to an end to invest. And so if you get to a point where you're transacting in the commercial brokerage space and your company also has an investing arm or a development arm, that gives you opportunities to potentially get in on projects. So a lot of times some of these brokerages will say, hey, we're going to start working on this project. It's a $5 million project. If you want to buy into the project, you could operate as a limited partner, you take your 25% share, you get a small percentage of this deal. And that's a good way for you to start creating the flywheel on the investment front. So, it's definitely something to consider. I think the brokerages and the businesses that offer that can be very attractive for people who are looking to get in the brokerage space.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. For a lot of a couple of agents on the residential side as well, I think brokerage is just a means to an end to invest, or in commercial, there'll be, kind of in the development space as well. So that's very interesting that you brought that up. I don't think, I've heard that anywhere, maybe just kind of my limited knowledge, but, kind of being a part of that, you can buy into, potential projects and be a part of those for the future as well. So that's very interesting. So something else that I think I wanted to kind of get your take on was more on the business generation side, right? So, residential agents, we all know some of the more common things that, they do to generate leads and generate clients. There's cold calling, door knocking, social media, paid ads, this and that, right? Different things that they are taught to do and they do. What are some ways that you see, are pretty common for a commercial agent or commercial broker to come in and start generating business, maybe from day one? What are some things they should be doing? Is it more on the calling end? Is it kind of like a mix of different things as well on that side?
Yeah, no, I'd say, those tried and true methods are going to apply to both, residential and commercial. I would say in the door knocking front, sometimes it's a little harder to door knock, especially if you're talking like office product. So, there's usually security on the front end of office buildings. So sometimes it's a little harder to get in and talk to the decision maker on that front. But on the retail side, popping into stores, I mean, I did that the other week. I just popped into a store for one of my lenders that I work with all the time, was starting to work with a gentleman, and she said, hey, he may be looking for a building soon. So I, just shot him a text and stopped in, kind of introduced myself. Like that type of stuff, is something that I would highly encourage. Obviously the cold calling front is a good way to get started. I mean, I didn't know a soul when I moved here to Louisville. I'm not from Louisville. I don't have family in Louisville. And so, leveraging that outreach effort was something that was helpful. And then digital, especially in commercial, because I feel like a lot of commercial agents do a horrible job of leveraging online platforms. Residential is way ahead of the curve. I mean, you get, people who are, active on social media on a regular basis. Right. They may have a YouTube channel, they may have a podcast, et cetera. But on the commercial front, it's still very blue waters. And so if you can kind of leverage that, it may not be something you see fruits from immediately. It may take you 4, 5, 6, 7 years, but I guarantee you that if you do it and you're consistent about it and you do add value on a regular basis, it's going to pay dividends as far as business is concerned. Other ways I've generated business, postcards are very effective, especially on the investing front. So I've done that. And then, social media and just leveraging networks. I started a couple meetups in town. I do on a regular basis. And so I've kind of built up a network through that. And then, anytime I work with a client, ask them for a review on Google, and then ask them, if they could refer, if they know of anyone else who's looking, right? That's just kind of tried and true methods in residential real estate. And so if you do that, and I can't promise it'll work immediately, it may take you a year, 2, 3, but eventually you're going to get to a point where you have consistent business flowing in.
Right. It's pretty interesting that you brought something up. Kind of wanted to maybe touch on this a little bit. It was that when you started, you didn't know anybody, right? So it wasn't like you grew up there and you had like this huge network of, everybody in town. You can, point out who the store owners are and they all come to you for business. I think a lot of people, when they think of commercial real estate, they think you need to have like really deep roots within, your local area. But that's clearly not the case because you were able to do it, kind of being a little bit newer or just being brand new to the location that you were at. And you're also able to be successful. So maybe touch on that a little bit and like, what are some things that you did in the beginning? I know you mentioned cold calling. Is that kind of mostly what you did, or is it just kind of going out there doing the meetups as well?
Yeah. So, I think I obviously got a little lucky in that I joined a brokerage that wanted to see me succeed. And so there was, instances where I would get looped in on deals, and I didn't necessarily have those relationships per se, but my broker and his son, Nick Rasanti, they just looped me in and said, hey, if you do the work, you'll get 50% of the deal. And, I just want you to start getting reps. And, that didn't happen like a ton. I mean, it happened 3, 4, 5 times maybe throughout my first couple of years. But, again, that's just getting at bats, getting reps, and then, getting a little bit of money in the door as well. And so that's why one of the reasons why I think joining a commercial brokerage is probably one of the best things you can do, is because you have that support system in place. And those individuals have been through what you've been in through. And a lot of times they'll just loop you in on stuff. And even if maybe you don't even get, the quote unquote money from the transaction, maybe they'll just loop you in on the listing. And then once you start getting, buyer clients calling in, or, lease clients coming in, at least you can start leveraging those connections to try to help them find something else if this particular transaction doesn't necessarily work out for them. And so, I would say for me, that was extremely helpful. And then, obviously the meetup helped me a lot, is that in that I got to really meet a ton of investors in the community, mostly residential to start off with. But, again, of 100 people, maybe 2 or 3, maybe business owners, or maybe they're investors that are looking to get into commercial. And so, leveraging that network that I built was how I got started primarily. And then obviously I started in mid 2019. COVID happened, very shortly thereafter. And for 2 or 3 months, I didn't have any business. All my clients had essentially said, we don't know what's going on in the world. We're not going to do anything. Right. So that's what made me focus heavily online. And now, my brand is built pretty solidly. I have over 2,000 YouTube subscribers, hundreds of thousands of downloads on the commercial real estate podcast front. Written a couple of books. So it's one of those things where, it took me a couple of years to get here, but at this point I feel pretty confident in being able to generate business. So.
Right. And I think that's pretty interesting you brought that up. And I totally agree. I don't think there's a lot of commercial agents out there, pounding social media as much as, probably they should be. So on that front, right? So what are some strategies that you've seen kind of really work well for you, specifically for commercial real estate? And what are some things that you think a lot of agents, maybe on the commercial side, are not necessarily realizing that they should be doing, or, some things that they're missing, maybe on their social media marketing, maybe just a small tweak on how their website's built out, that could really start actually generating them business and start helping them build their overall brand moving forward?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think a big part of it is just putting yourself out there. I feel like a lot of people just don't feel comfortable doing so. And that is something you just have to get over if you're wanting to at least present yourself online in any form or fashion. As far as what I've chose to focus on, I'm big into video, because I feel like if you can see and hear someone talk about whatever it is about their expertise, I feel the trust factor is built a lot quicker. So like if you or someone else watches a video like this podcast, for example, if someone decides to watch this and they hear us talking back and forth, they feel like they get to know us. And so if they meet us in public or meet us somewhere else, they'll say, oh, I watched an episode or a video of yours, and, you brought up some good points. And, maybe, we're the way we're talking, that helps to build trust with people. And so it's no longer, who are you? It's, oh, I've seen something of yours, and the barrier is dropped a little bit more.
Right.
And so that'll help your other efforts, whether that's cold calling, whether that's networking or whatever, because the introductions no longer are cold. It's a lot more lubricated as far as that's concerned. So, I just focus on video, at least in my case, focus on video, and you chop them up into short clips, take them, throw it on LinkedIn, throw it on YouTube. YouTube short clips are gangbusters right now. They're pushing heavy on YouTube. Yeah. Same thing with TikTok, and obviously TikTok's not really where a lot of our clients are going to be right now, but their kids are, so might as well just throw it on there. And then I focus heavily on LinkedIn as well, just kind of the main focus area as far as commercial is concerned. And then Facebook, I'm telling you, people say that it's not really worth it, but if you have a pretty big network and you throw stuff on Facebook and your network likes your stuff, maybe their friend who's a business owner ends up seeing it. It's one of those things where leveraging and putting your face on as many networks as possible is not a bad thing. And so I would take long form content, chop it up in a ton of short pieces, and then just use that to blast out as much as you can.
Yep, absolutely. I love that. and I can totally see that, because you also host your own podcast as well. And I've always said that like podcasting is probably like the most versatile when it comes to like content. It doesn't matter what topic, right? It could be commercial, residential, you could be selling cars, cakes, whatever. I think podcasting is probably just the most versatile, because you can get so many pieces of content out of it. We're sitting here, we're talking, we're giving good information. And it's also a great relationship builder for anybody who's listening, because this is not so much, me talking to a camera in front of an audience, or, just to a camera, but it's more so like we're talking to each other, so they can get to know a little bit more about like who this person really is, and kind of dig deep into our opinions, our thoughts, how we work, how we communicate, and different things like that. So
absolutely. And even leveraging, the interview format. I mean, right now, like, we built a connection because we're on a podcast together. Like, if you start a podcast and you're wanting to focus on, let's say, multifamily investing, right? What better idea than to reach out to local multifamily investors and interview them on the podcast? Because now you have a built-in buyers list, because you've already built a relationship with your target audience. Or maybe you reach out to some of these property owners and just kind of get a feel for how they got started, and maybe have have them on a podcast. That inherently builds that barrier, that relationship, and so now your network expands. Mm-hmm. So I think there's multiple value points for podcasting in general. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think people can go out there, start interviewing, business owners, and just be like, the business podcast, right? For local business podcast. And it'd be really helpful for not only the listeners, but like you said, for you to make new connections as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the things that, I think I want to kind of get your take on as well was just, kind of like maybe like the sales and the communication aspect of, working with, different commercial clients, right? So I think it's a different type of communication, a different type of sales process when it comes to working through a deal. I mean, obviously it takes a lot longer. So I think, probably takes more relationship building through the process versus, a residential agent is more so, they might call them, they might not call them, they might set certain boundaries, but for commercial, it's a little bit more, a little bit more building a relationship through the deal, so you make sure the deal happens. So maybe you can kind of walk us through that, what kind of goes into it, maybe how the sales process works, different tools that, might come up that maybe be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So I think it all depends on the client, because, you work with some mom and pops that are just getting started, and the experience is very emotional, because they're, it's their first foray into business, and they're wanting to manifest a dream that they've had for a long period of time. And so, in those instances, you got to set expectations early on, and understand, get ready for the road ahead, because a lot of times, clients can get disheartened because, maybe they don't find the site immediately, or maybe they find the site and then there's issues that arise through the negotiation. And, it may take them 6 months, maybe takes them a year to finally get what they're looking for. And if they're not prepared for that journey, a lot of times they can get disheartened, and maybe the relationship sours over time. So setting that expectation is important. And, that comes with experience. I've worked with people in the past for a year, and the relationship fell apart because, they were just so emotionally drawn into the process. And because they weren't able to make progress right away, they kind of lost inspiration and they just,
Right.
fell off as clients. And
Mhm.
so on the corporate level, it's a lot more structured. Like it's kind of a business as usual type thing, especially on the development front. It's like, does it check these boxes? And if it does, let's start working through the process of getting this property purchased and, developed or whatever else. And so, again, it just depends on the client. But as far as the purchase side is concerned, getting an understanding of what they're looking for, and then, go out there and try to find those properties, whether that's existing listings that you have, calling different brokers to kind of get an idea of what's coming to market, maybe even cold calling or reaching out to property owners in an area that, own a property that your client's looking for. And then from there, once you come to the, agreement as far as whether they like that property, it's normal, like purchasing a property, right? It's negotiation on what you're looking for as far as price, any type of due diligence timeframes. Due diligence timeframes tend to be longer in commercial than residential. Your inspections are usually going to be longer. The financing time frame, depending on whether or not they're going conventional or small business administration, SBA financing, may be longer as well. And then you have environmental things you got to take into consideration, especially if there's any evidence of dry cleaners or convenience stores, or I mean, not convenience stores, but gas stations, et cetera.
Right.
So, there's several things that you need to check off the box as far as, things to consider as you're going through the process of your due diligence. And then once you close on the property, the build out. So construction build outs or commercial construction projects are typically a lot more expensive than residential construction, primarily because you got to take into consideration public safety. And there's usually more permitting. There's other things you need to consider. And so that's why I always encourage people to work with commercial construction companies versus residential construction, because there could be something they miss that could really damage or hurt your business. And so, that's kind of the basic, timeline as far as purchasing existing structure. Obviously, there's a lot more nuances when you're talking about land acquisition, because you have to factor in zoning. Maybe there's, remediation that needs to be done on site. Maybe there's, a stream that's running through the property that needs to be relocated because maybe it's wetlands. So there's other factors that come into play. Sewers coming to site is a very big factor for those individuals, and topography. There's so much stuff, so, I think getting nuanced in that requires you to really work on that space for a long period of time. And then,
Right. Absolutely. It's just more about like getting the experience, right? Getting the knowledge from kind of working through deals, maybe talking to different people, right? Again, like you don't know what you don't know. So once you kind of get into it, start working on what the deal, you start learning about different things. And then on like the next transaction or the next client that you're working with, or the next deal, you know a little bit more, you learn a little bit more, you kind of take that knowledge and you apply it to your overall, like your overall arsenal of expert knowledge and expert experience.
Absolutely. And I would say that's another very good reason why you want to get with a commercial brokerage, because there's a lot of things that I'm 3 years in, or 3 and change years in. So I don't know a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of things where I'm coming across and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And then I talk to my broker and he's like, oh, that's fine. Just do this and this and this, so it creates that, the quick response time to get the transaction to the finish line. Whereas if I were to do that somewhere where they don't have the same experience, it may become a bigger hurdle to overcome, and it could cause issues. And so again, just kind of another spiel towards really focusing on commercial.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the case, right? If you're willing to kind of commit to that, right, you would at least find, maybe different, like the very least, like what they can do is find another agent maybe in their market, or a broker who's pretty experienced, and then kind of work through the deal, like work it through with them, or maybe just refer it to them and then ask to maybe tag along and kind of learn the deal. And then once you kind of are willing to kind of go in full time into commercial real estate, definitely go and do it, with your intention in mind, because, a lot of these residential brokers, right, they don't know how to go work through a commercial deal, right? They might be licensed as a broker in their state, but they don't have necessarily the knowledge of how to work through some of these different details of a commercial transaction, right? Because they've only worked in residential. They've maybe never done any commercial deals in their life, right? So how do you expect them to be able to help you? So if you ever wanted to, kind of do that, right, it's always better to just find the expert who's done it, and then maybe give up, potential commission that you could have earned, but just to learn it so that you can actually be more intentional about it in the future.
Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, man, I think this was a really helpful episode for us to kind of sit down and talk a little bit more about, commercial real estate. I definitely learned a lot. And I think, anybody listening who want to get more into commercial and to learn a little bit more about commercial real estate, hopefully they got a lot of value out of this. So, kind of like for anybody who's listening or watching this who want to, reach out to you, who want to learn more about kind of what you do and any of the things that relate to, getting more into commercial real estate, maybe they want to check out your podcast. What are some of the best ways for people to kind of find you on the internet and social media or anything else?
No, for sure. And first off, I just want to thanks for the opportunity, man. It really is great to sit down with you and talk to you and build a connection, and hopefully we can keep in contact. But as far as the keeping in touch, I mean, really, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Rafael Collazo, Collazo. You can go to my website as well. If you want to learn more about the commercial real estate side, I've written a couple books on commercial real estate, one being Before You Sign That Lease. It really talks about the step-by-step process from the business owner's perspective about how to get into a commercial lease. And it's very nuanced as far as, the step-by-step process. So if you're an agent looking to do a commercial lease deal, highly encourage you to read it. I think it'll help you immensely as you're going through the process. I also wrote a book called Before You Buy That Building. Same type of process, right? How do you get from a business owner wanting to buy a building to actually getting to the finish line? And that's the book called Before You Buy That Building. And I'm finishing up a book right now called Before You Sell That Building, which is going to talk about from the business owner's perspective, how do you sell your property now that you've, operated your business for 20 years and you want to sail off into the sunset, and you want to make sure you get top dollar for what your property is, and it's not a marketing book. I wanted to make sure it was very densely packed with information that's actually applicable, and it's not just one big marketing pitch. So, hopefully that's a big value add for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll leave that down below, and also the link to your YouTube channel and your podcast,
Yes.
the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast as well.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about a bunch of different commercial real estate topics. And then the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, we interview commercial real estate professionals across the country to talk about different commercial real estate topics. So,
right. That's probably a really good resource for anybody who wanting to get more information on this. So we'll make sure to leave that in the show notes in the description down below, so you guys can always check that out for your convenience. But other than that, Raphael, I want to thank you again for being on the show. Is there any last thoughts you kind of want to leave with us before we let you sign off here? Or?
No, I mean, if you're interested in getting the commercial, do it, man. Don't let your, because I understand the fear, because it's scary taking on something new, but I mean, I love commercial real estate. I couldn't see myself doing anything different. So if it really is something you want to do, take the leap and you'll be thankful for it.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your value with us today, Raphael. I want to thank you again. And for anybody else tuning in, I want to thank you for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week. Take care.